What if I told you that avoiding stress is actually the fastest way to destroy your life and career? Welcome to the show. Grab a cup of coffee, settle in, and let's take a journey today into one of the most profound, counterintuitive, and frankly, revolutionary ideas of the modern era. I want you to look around you for a second. Look at the structures we've built. Look at our financial systems, our medical institutions, our schools, our governments, even the way we raise our children. We live in a world that is absolutely obsessed with safety. We want to smooth out every bump in the road. We want to predict every crisis, manage every risk, and wrap our entire existence in a giant layer of bubble wrap. We think that by eliminating volatility, by removing stress and disorder from our lives, we are making ourselves safe. But what if I told you that this exact obsession with safety is actually the greatest danger we face? What if our relentless pursuit of stability is secretly making us, and everything we care about, incredibly vulnerable to catastrophic collapse? Today, we are doing a massive deep dive into the intellectual foundation of Nassim Nicholas Taleb's masterpiece, Antifragile. Things that gain from disorder star. This isn't just a book about economics or mathematics. This is a fundamental rewriting of how we understand life, survival, and success in a chaotic universe. Taleb is a thinker who doesn't just challenge the status quo, he takes a sledgehammer to it. And in the opening sections of this book, he lays down a framework that will fundamentally change the way you look at everything from a minor cold to the 2008 banking crisis. Let's start with a thought experiment. Imagine you are going to the post office to mail a package. Inside this package is a delicate, crystal glass cup. You walk up to the counter, and you ask the clerk for a stamp to put on the box so the handlers know how to treat it. What does the stamp say? It says, "Fragile, handle with care." Now I want you to ask yourself a very simple question. What is the exact opposite of that package? If you ask 10 people on the street what the opposite of fragile is, 9 of them will probably say robust, or resilient, or strong. They'll imagine a package containing a solid block of stone. If you drop the stone, it doesn't break. It survives. But think about this logically for a second. The fragile crystal cup is harmed by shocks, harmed by drops, harmed by disorder. The robust stone is indifferent to those shocks. It doesn't care if you drop it, but it certainly doesn't get better. So, logically, robust is merely the middle ground. It is the neutral point on the spectrum. The true opposite of fragile would be a package that actually wants to be dropped. It would be a package with a stamp on it that reads, "Please mishandle, needs to be dropped to improve." This is the linguistic blind spot that Taleb exposes right out of the gate. He points out that in almost every human language, from ancient Greek to modern English, we do not have a single word for things that gain from disorder. We have words for things that break, and words for things that stay the same. But we have been completely blind to the category of things that actually require stress, shocks, and volatility to grow, improve, and thrive. Because there was no word for it, Taleb had to invent one. He called it antifragile. Why does it matter that we didn't have a word for this? Well, Taleb brings up a fascinating piece of linguistic history. He references the statesman William Gladstone and the linguist Guy Deutscher, who studied the works of Homer, the ancient Greek poet who wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey. Homer famously described the ocean as the wine-dark sea. Why didn't he just call it blue? Because, as it turns out, the ancient Greeks did not have a word for the color blue. And because they lacked the vocabulary, they functionally lacked the cultural awareness of the color as a distinct entity. Without the word, you cannot fully grasp the concept. By giving us the word antifragile, Taleb is finally giving us the lens to see a fundamental property of the universe that has been hiding in plain sight. To really cement this concept, Taleb gives us a beautiful taxonomy, a triad of categories based on ancient mythology to help us understand how things respond to stress. First, you have the fragile, represented by the sword of Damocles. Damocles was a courtier who was allowed to sit on the king's throne to experience his power. But the king hung a razor-sharp sword directly over Damocles' head, suspended by a single hair from a horse's tail. This is the ultimate symbol of fragility. It looks powerful, but it requires absolute tranquility to survive. A single gust of wind, a single stressor, the hair snaps, and it's game over. Fragility is a state where you are constantly waiting for the inevitable disaster. Next in the triad is the robust, represented by the mythical phoenix. When the phoenix dies, it bursts into flames, but then it rises from the ashes, reborn. It is resilient. But notice something crucial here: the phoenix returns to its exact previous state. It doesn't come back as a super phoenix. It just survives. It endures. Finally, we have the antifragile, represented by the Hydra from Greek mythology. The Hydra is a terrifying, multi-headed serpent. When a warrior swings a sword and chops off one of the Hydra's heads, 2 more heads grow back in its place. The Hydra doesn't just survive the stress of decapitation, it actively uses that stress to become exponentially more dangerous. It loves the sword. It benefits from harm. This brings us to the core argument of Taleb's philosophy, and it is a massive critique of how we run our modern world. Our society is currently structured by people who want to turn everything into the phoenix, or worse, into Damocles, while actively killing the Hydra. Taleb points out a fundamental difference between the mechanical and the biological. Think about a washing machine. A washing machine is mechanical. At its absolute best, it is robust. But no matter how well you build it, every time you run a load of laundry, the machine experiences wear and tear. It slowly degrades over time. It can never heal itself. Now, think about the human body. The human body is organic, therefore, it is antifragile. If you treat your body like a washing machine, if you leave it idle, sitting on a couch, perfectly protected from the wear and tear of the world, what happens? Your muscles atrophy. Your bones lose density. Your cardiovascular system weakens. The human body actually requires the stress of gravity, the micro tears of exercise, and the occasional deprivation of hunger to signal it to grow stronger. Yet, as Taleb argues, modern society is run by people who treat complex, organic, antifragile systems as if they were fragile washing machines. He calls these people the fragilistas. The fragilista is the ultimate villain in Taleb's worldview. This is the naive rationalist, the central planner, the overeducated academic who believes that if they cannot perfectly model or understand a system on a spreadsheet, it must be flawed and in need of their intervention. This leads us into what Taleb brilliantly mocks as the Soviet Harvard illusion. It's the arrogant idea that top-down theory is what drives human progress. Taleb uses a hilarious and devastating metaphor. He calls it teaching birds how to fly. Imagine a group of Harvard professors standing in a field, giving a lecture on aerodynamics to a flock of birds. The birds eventually take off, and the professors pat themselves on the back, write a paper, and declare that the birds flew because of their lecture. This is how we view history, economics, and innovation. We think that academics and theorists discover a mathematical law, hand it down to the practitioners, and then progress happens. Taleb argues that reality is exactly the opposite. Knowledge is a bottom-up phenomenon. It is the practitioners, the tinkerers, the people actually doing the work, who drive progress through trial and error. Think about the Industrial Revolution. It wasn't driven by theoretical physicists in an ivory tower. It was driven by uneducated mechanics and engineers tinkering with steam engines, making mistakes, blowing things up, and figuring out what worked through experience-based heuristics. Think about cooking. We didn't get the perfect sauce because a chemist wrote a formula. We got it because a cook accidentally dropped an ingredient into a pot, tasted it, and realized it was amazing. Trial and error is an antifragile process. You make a small mistake, you learn from it, and the system improves. But when academics come in after the fact, they formalize these messy, beautiful, organic discoveries into rigid laws. And in doing so, they strip away the volatility that allowed the discovery in the first place, making the system incredibly fragile. The fragilista cannot stand this messy, bottom-up process. They want control. And this desire for control leads to what Taleb calls naive intervention. Because the fragilista believes they know best, they constantly intervene in complex systems to smooth out the bumps. And this is where things get dangerous. Taleb introduces the concept of iatrogenics, a medical term that means harm caused by the healer. In medicine, we see this when doctors overprescribe antibiotics or perform unnecessary surgeries, denying the body's natural antifragile healing process and causing severe, sometimes fatal side effects. We see it in psychiatry, where normal childhood behaviors are pathologized and children are heavily medicated to fit a docile, predictable mold. But we also see it on a massive scale in economics and society. Think about overprotective parents, the helicopter parents, who try to remove every single obstacle, every germ, every minor conflict from their child's life. What is the result? They are mothering their children into extreme fragility. When that child finally enters the real world and faces a genuine stressor, they don't have the emotional or psychological calluses to handle it. And they shatter. Governments and central bankers do the exact same thing to the economy. Taleb points heavily to the 2008 banking crisis as the ultimate example of fragilista failure. For years, the experts at the Federal Reserve and in the big banks intervened to suppress small market fluctuations. They wanted a perfectly smooth, predictable economy. But by suppressing the small fires, they allowed the dead wood to accumulate in the forest. They artificially removed the volatility that a healthy system needs to correct itself. And when the spark finally caught, it wasn't a small brush fire, it was a devastating, systemic inferno. By trying to tame randomness, they harmed the system. This brings us to Taleb's profound philosophy on uncertainty and time. The environment that the fragilista hates, Taleb calls the disorder family. This family includes uncertainty, variability, imperfect knowledge, chaos, volatility, randomness, and time. Yes, time. Taleb makes a fascinating point here. Time is functionally identical to volatility. Think about it. The more time that passes, the more events happen, the more shocks occur, the more disorder is introduced into a system. If something is fragile, like a crystal cup or a highly leveraged bank, time is its enemy. Eventually, a shock will come and break it. But if something is antifragile, like a healthy immune system, or the collective wisdom of a grandmother, time is its greatest ally. Antifragile things feed on time and the disorder it brings. This is why Taleb is so fiercely critical of our obsession with risk prediction. In his previous blockbuster book, The Black Swan, Taleb proved that we are fundamentally incapable of predicting rare, high-impact, unpredictable events. We cannot predict the black swans. We don't know when the next pandemic will hit, when the stock market will crash, or when a massive earthquake will strike. The fragilistas spend billions of dollars building complex computer models to predict these events, and they fail every single time. Taleb says we need to stop playing this foolish game. Since we cannot measure the probability of a rare event, we must instead measure our fragility to it. It is incredibly difficult to predict exactly when an earthquake will happen. But it is remarkably easy to walk into a city, look at the buildings, and tell which ones are built poorly and will collapse when the shaking starts. A modern, cheaply built, rigid skyscraper is fragile. The Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, which has survived centuries of wars, weather, and time, has proven its robust, almost anti-fragile nature. We need to stop trying to predict the earthquake, and start focusing on building systems that either don't care about the shaking, or actually benefit from it. How do we do this? Taleb argues for the philosophy of simplicity. We live in a world that assumes complex problems require complex solutions and massive books of regulations. But Taleb, channeling people like Steve Jobs, notes that it takes incredibly hard work to get your thinking clean enough to make things simple. In a complex system, a complex intervention creates a multiplier effect of unintended consequences. You pull one lever, and 3 alarms go off. So you pull 3 more levers to fix the alarms, and suddenly the whole machine is melting down. Instead of complex regulations, Taleb advocates for heuristics, simple rules of thumb based on generations of experience. The beauty of a heuristic, unlike a complex mathematical model, is that the person using it knows it isn't perfect. It's a rough guide. Because you know it's imperfect, you don't blindly trust it, which prevents you from being fooled into catastrophic failure. This is the difference between the naive rationalist and what Taleb calls the Dionysian, drawing on Nietzsche's concept of the spontaneous, the passionate, the slightly irrational. Taleb translates this high philosophy into Brooklyn speak through a recurring character in his books named Fat Tony. Fat Tony isn't an intellectual. He doesn't wear a suit to a Harvard lecture hall. He's a street-smart guy who operates on common sense and an acute awareness of human nature. Fat Tony looks at the highly educated fragilistas making massive interventions with tiny visible gains and catastrophic hidden risks. And he correctly identifies them as suckers' bets. Fat Tony survives and thrives because he embraces the chaos, while the academics blow up because they think they can control it. And this clash between the academic and the practitioner brings us to the deep, ethical core of Taleb's work. As we reach the latter part of this foundational section, Taleb shifts from the mechanics of systems to the morality of the people running them. He introduces a concept that is absolutely vital for a functioning society: skin in the game. Taleb argues that a major cause of the modern crises we face, the economic collapses, the endless wars, the disastrous public policies, is the unethical transfer of fragility. What does that mean? It means that a certain class of people have figured out how to make themselves completely antifragile at the expense of everyone else. They get all the upside of volatility, while forcing the public to absorb all the downside. Taleb calls these people the inverse heroes. A traditional hero takes on personal risk for the benefit of the collective. Think of a soldier or a firefighter. But the inverse hero, the Stiglitz type, intellectual, the Davos billionaire, the bailed-out banker, the career politician, takes risks with other people's money and other people's lives. When their complex models work, they pay themselves massive bonuses and go to fancy conferences in Switzerland to congratulate themselves. But when their models blow up, as they inevitably do, they don't lose their homes. They don't lose their jobs. They just get bailed out by the taxpayer, shrug their shoulders, and write another book. They have absolutely no personal downside. For Taleb, this is not just an economic problem, it is a profound moral failing. A true, healthy, anti-fragile system requires that the people making decisions have their own skin in the game. If you stand to gain from the upside, you must be violently exposed to the downside. If a bridge engineer builds a bridge, he should have to sleep under it. That is how you ensure quality. Taleb applies this ethical standard to himself, introducing the concept of doxastic commitment, meaning you must take personal risks for your beliefs. He famously states that he refuses to write about anything he hasn't personally experienced or risked his own money on. He has a rule: eating what I cook. When Taleb warned the world that the banking system was incredibly fragile and on the verge of collapse before 2008, he didn't just write an op-ed. He put his own money on the line and bet heavily on the collapse. He argues that if he hadn't bet his own money, it would have been highly unethical for him to write about it. It's a staggering level of intellectual honesty. He also applies this to his writing process through what he calls the library filter. Taleb despises the idea of an academic sitting in a library, reading 10 books just to synthesize them into an 11th book. For Taleb, Ideas shouldn't come from a sterile library. They should come from bleeding in the real world. An idea needs to simmer in the chaos of reality. It needs to be tested by stress, before it is worthy of being written down. He operates by a strict anti-fraud rule. If you see fraud and do not say fraud, you are a fraud. Compromising with fragilistas, being polite to people who are endangering society with their naive interventions, is not being civil. It is tolerating evil. This leads to a brilliant and scathing comparison between the two worlds Taleb has inhabited, the halls of academia and the bustling, chaotic marketplaces of the Levant. Taleb describes the modern academic environment as fossilized. Because academics have tenure, because they have no real-world skin in the game, their environment becomes a toxic swamp of petty obsessions, intense envy, and cold hatred. The stakes are so low, and the lack of real-world feedback is so profound, that conflicts become deeply personal and endlessly bitter. Contrast this with the marketplace. Now, intellectuals tend to look down on commerce as greedy or base. But Taleb argues that small-scale commerce, the kind you see in a bustling street market, is actually the greatest engine of tolerance and honesty in human history. Why? Because the marketplace is inherently antifragile. In trade, you make mistakes constantly, but they are small mistakes. You buy the wrong product, you price something slightly too high, you lose a little money. But the market corrects you instantly. You get immediate, real-world feedback. And more importantly, in small-scale commerce, your survival depends on your reputation. If you cheat someone, word gets around, and you go out of business. The marketplace has a dynamic, self-cleaning mechanism. It forces people to cooperate, to be honest, and to tolerate each other's differences because they want to do business together. The marketplace thrives on the daily, chaotic, bottom-up interactions of real people with real skin in the game, while the university rots from the top down. So, where does this leave us? As we pull all of these threads together, we can see the monumental scale of what Taleb is building in just the opening pages of this book. He is asking us to fundamentally rewire our brains. We have to stop viewing the world through the lens of a fragile crystal cup. We have to stop fearing the wind. Think of Taleb's ultimate metaphor here, the candle and the fire. When the wind blows on a candle, the candle is extinguished. The candle is fragile. It needs the air to be perfectly still. But when the wind blows on a roaring fire, the fire feeds on it. The fire uses the wind to grow hotter, larger, and more powerful. The wind is the disorder of the world. It is the chaos, the uncertainty, the volatility, the black swan events that we spend our entire lives trying to predict and avoid. The fragilistas of the world, the central planners, the helicopter parents, the overprescribing doctors, the ivory tower economists, they want to turn all of us into candles. And they want to spend their lives building giant glass boxes to protect us from the wind. But the glass boxes always shatter eventually. And when they do, the wind destroys the candle. Taleb's message is a rallying cry. Do not be the candle. You must become the fire. You must structure your life, your business, your health, and your mind in such a way that when the wind of uncertainty blows, you don't just survive it. You don't just bounce back to where you were like the phoenix. You grow another head like the hydra. You step into the unknown, you embrace the trial and error, you put your skin in the game, and you let the chaos make you stronger. This opening section of Antifragile is just the foundation, but it gives us the vocabulary we have been missing since the days of Homer. We now have a name for the thing we must become. We must move beyond the fragile illusion of safety. We must move beyond the boring stagnation of the robust. We have to lean into the disorder. We have to become antifragile. Think about how you can apply this to your own life today. Where are you acting like a fragile washing machine, avoiding stress at all costs, only to slowly wear yourself down? Where are you trusting top-down theories instead of getting your hands dirty and learning through bottom-up tinkering? And most importantly, where are you taking advice from people who have absolutely no skin in the game? It's time to strip away the bubble wrap. It's time to stop trying to predict the unpredictable and start building a life that actually looks forward to the earthquake. That's what it means to be the fire. That's what it means to wish for the wind. Thank you for diving into this massive, paradigm-shifting concept with me today. Let these ideas simmer. Look at the world around you, spot the fragilistas, and start building your own anti-fragility. Until next time, stay curious, stay engaged, and let the disorder make you better.